Before I start, just to give you a little bit of background on myself. I'm really a third generation railwayman. Trams came by chance. My grandfather was an engine driver for 40 years. He retired, but his son, my father, he joined the railways in the 1930s in the office in Wellington, and he was the publicity and advertising manager when he retired in 1976. I was his firstborn son, and I followed his footsteps. I think there might have been a bit of guidance there, which I only discovered later, but I joined the railways in 1960 as an accountancy cadet, and I came through the finance and accounts branch. But going back a little bit, my father also founded the New Zealand Railway and Locomotive Society. He was a real rail enthusiast, and he took me along, and I suppose it was voluntary, but I went along to meetings from when I was about 11 or 12 years old, so it sort of got in the blood. Now, at those meetings, we're talking about the late 50s, early 60s, there was a group of members there, monthly meetings, and they were interested in railways, but they were also interested in the trams in Wellington. And because the trams in Wellington were on the way out, especially in the 60s, there was a lot of rushing around and photographing, and I was just of that age, mid-teens, that this was a great thing to do, great excitement, and so I joined that group, and that morphed eventually into the Wellington Tramway Museum. And so I became involved with that right from the start, which was in the early 60s, but really got going in 1964, 65 when the trams finished in Wellington. So, as you can see there on the screen, I'm just going to talk about a brief history of Wellington's trams, and I will show some special bits about Island Bay, Lyall Bay, and Kilburn and so on. But generally, just how they all happened and what they were like, and I can see, how many of you can actually remember the trams running in Wellington? It's amazing, it's the majority of you, I think, yeah, about 2/3 of you. We find at the Tramway Museum that visitors now, the majority are people who their memory of trams is coming to the Tramway Museum when they were kids, and they're bringing their kids. And there's not so many now who go up there and say, oh, I remember going to Island Bay, I remember Miramar, I remember even Karori on the going to Karori on the trams. So firstly, when did they start? Opening day was in 1904, 30th of June 1904. It was a tremendous excitement in Wellington. The line went from Newtown to the city, eventually through Courtenay Place to the station, but right at the start it just went to, I think, Courtenay Place. But here's the trams on the very first opening day around the Basin Reserve. They had double-deckers, they were four-wheelers, these ones, and you can see everyone dressed in their Sunday best, and lots of very important people. When you look at the photograph closely, it looks like everyone's dressed up and up on the top deck, and just absolutely revolutionary the way they were travelling. Wellington had trams before. It had horse trams, and it had steam-powered trams. The steam trams didn't last long. They were in the 1880s, but the rails that were laid for the steam trams were just too lightweight, and they buckled under the pressure. So they only lasted 2 or 3 years, plus complaints from owners of horses, which had been scared by the steam trams. But horse-drawn trams lasted right through to when the electric trams started. And in fact, the City Council bought out the horse tram company, the main one. It cost £19,382, which is about £5 million today, to buy out the horse tram company. The sequence of events when the tram started at the turn of the century, right throughout the world, if you like, Europe and America especially, and down here, Australia and New Zealand, there was an explosion in electric tramway installations throughout the whole world, well, throughout everywhere. In 1901, Wellington City Corporation decided to get electric trams. 1902, the contract was let to a project manager, McElroy, of the Company of London. And they organised they project managed, in effect, the installation of the tracks, the installation of the overhead wires, underground cables, and also the supply of 33 trams, which are the first trams for Wellington. Simultaneously, there were a lot of other things to do. Construction of a big depot, that was the one at Newtown. And the depot included a workshop area at that stage. Had to put in a big power station, that was in Jervois Quay, and it was coal-fired, so that was quite smoky at the time. But Wellington wasn't alone. Wellington Trams, as you saw, started in 1904. Auckland started in 1902, Christchurch 1903, and also Dunedin in 1903. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but other cities in New Zealand also had trams. New Plymouth, Wanganui, Napier, Invercargill, and even Gisborne had trams for a time. The initial routes, you can see there. And on 29th of October 1902, there was a ceremony at the Thornton end of Lambton Quay to turn the first lump of road metal, and I'll show you what that turned into. That's the Thornton, the railway station end of Lambton Quay, or Thornton end of Lambton Quay. And I thought to myself, this is well shades of getting Wellington moving, 1902 style. But there seems to be a slight shortage of the high-vis jackets and the road cones that we got used to in the last couple of years in Thornton Quay. But anyway, in this photo, there's you can see on the back right the old Thornton station. That was the railway station for the Wellington and Manawatu Railway Company. And there were two stations, of course, until the late 1930s. Thornton station. The private company got taken over by the government when the main trunk line opened in 1908-09. But at this stage, 1902, it was a private company which ran trains, and very good trains, up through Johnsonville, over to Tawa, because the big tunnels hadn't been built at that stage, through Tawa, and then up to Pakariki and on to Longburn, which was the terminus, where it joined onto the government railway. That's a bit of an aside, but it's quite interesting to see that there. Laying the tram tracks was quite an upheaval. As you can see there, this was what I call James Smith's Corner. The Royal Oak Hotel is on the back left there, and the Union Clothing Company, which I remember as Vance Vivian's, but Union Clothing was on the opposite corner, on the right-hand side. And James Smith's, of course, wasn't there then, but it was on the corner on the left in the foreground. But that is what was involved in laying, or part of what was involved in laying the tracks. And one interesting thing with the Wellington tram tracks in the city was that I remember all the fuss in planning light rail in the last few years. What route shall we take through the city? You know, will it go down the Quays, or will it go through the Golden Mile, or what? Or will it go up Taranaki Street even, or something like that? And our city forefathers didn't really worry about that. They put tracks everywhere. Not immediately. There was the Golden Mile initially, but this shows here that that's looking up Cuba Street. And there were tracks from Lower Cuba Street, actually going through where the Michael Fowler Centre is now, and down onto Jervois Quay, and up Cuba Street, but also from right to left along Manor Street. One of the characteristics of all the tracks that they built in the city was that if a tram broke down, if there was a hold-up anywhere, the trams could just divert off onto another route. There were tram lines down if you went from Courtenay Place, the main route was to turn left into Courtenay Place, along Manor Street, down Willis Street, along Lambton Quay to the railway station. That was the so-called Golden Mile. But some trams took other routes, but also if there was a hold-up, a breakdown, trams could travel the other routes anyway. So Wakefield Street to the town, or to the end of Wakefield Street, you turn right onto Lower Cuba Street, past the town hall, and onto Jervois Quay, along Jervois Quay, into, I think, anyway, in recent years, into Whitmore Street, and then down to the railway station. You could take that route, or you could go Lower Cuba Street and join in along with the other tracks in front of the town hall, or you could go down Custom House Quay from Willis Street. And that meant that there was a variety of ways that trams could get from one end of the city Golden Mile area to the other end. And that was also used in rush hours when you had the main service would go through the Golden Mile, but a lot of workers' trams and so on, they would take a faster route through the, what they call the back streets, but nowadays the quays are the main streets. So that's just a little aside. How did Wellington afford trams? Ratepayers approved a loan of £225,000, which is over $50 million today, to fund the initial routes and trams. In 1907, another loan of £150,000, so another $32 million. That was to purchase the electric light and power company because it couldn't keep up with the power demands, and it was a company that became the MED, the Municipal Electricity Department, and it supplied the trams with power. So that was, there was also, it was an expansionary time for the city, this 1904. The new town hall, which is now the old town hall, opened in 1904 as well as the trams, and that had another separate loan of £50,000. They built water supply dams in Wainui, which meant that the city had to borrow even more. At the same time, they opened the zoo in 1905. The crematorium at Karori was opened in 1909, and the city abattoir at Naranga opened in 1909. And another interesting thing is that Melrose Borough, which was the old borough, that was amalgamated by majority vote in 1903, before the trams got going, and that meant Melrose could take advantage of being part of Wellington City's tram system. And it was one of the main selling points. The tracks soon extended from Thornton through the city to Newtown. The first trams there were 32 of them, and they were built by the British Car Company of Manchester, and they were assembled at Newtown. And the Brule Company in the United States provided the wheels, or the bogies, or the chassis, the underframes, if you like, the trucks. For the four-wheel trams have what they call trucks, whereas bogie trams have, of course, what you call bogies, but sometimes they're called double truck trams. But there's some trams being assembled in Newtown. They're flat-packed from Britain, and there's other photos around of the bogies and the wheels already, and motors all ready to be assembled. The opening of the Thornton to Newtown route in 1904, that followed years of chaos and disruption as the tracks were laid and overhead lines were erected, and the city was very pleased to see that done. And it hastened, of course, the end of the horse-drawn age, opened up land for housing, It provided, and because of the cheap transport for workers, workers could now live further out from the city. And not only all that, but they were actually a cash cow for the council to start with. The first 20 years or so, up till the 1920s, they made quite significant profits for the council. And at one stage, the central government wanted to have a part ownership, and this was a proposal, not just for Wellington, but for tramway systems in New Zealand, that the government should get a share of the profits. And that might have been quite good if they'd taken it up, because now they could take a share of the losses. Well, they do actually on public transport through MOT. There's one. Wellington has a very difficult city in which to build trams. Because of the narrow streets, sharp corners, steep grades, an unusual track gauge was chosen for Wellington, 4 feet. If you go overseas to Melbourne, for example, it's 4 foot 8.5, which is the standard gauge for railways and tramways throughout the world, or 3 foot 6, like the railways here for narrow gauge. But for some reason, which we've never really found the proof of why it was, they chose a 4 foot gauge. It was a gauge that was in use in certain cities in England, but it wasn't that common. And Wellington was one of the last cities in the world to use that gauge. Anyway, it also meant that the characteristics of Wellington meant that Wellington's trams were narrower and shorter, altogether smaller, had a lower carrying capacity than those in other large New Zealand cities. This is just one example of, it's a tram going around from, do you know where Hopper Street is? Hopper Street into Webb Street. That was the old route that went past, along Wallace Street and into John Street and down to Adelaide Junction, and then it could head either to Island Bay or Newtown, or in fact over the hill to Kilburn. You can see that tram, the curve is causing the wheels to come right out from under the body, and the front of the tram is almost over onto the other tracks. And there was no way that a tram could, on that corner, could pass another tram. If the driver coming the other way saw a tram coming around the corner, he had to stop short and let the first tram around the corner. Okay, the other thing I've emphasised, the steep hills in Wellington. Wellington trams were fitted with magnetic track brakes as well as ordinary hand brakes, and in the later years they had air brakes as well. And magnetic track brakes, as my friend at the back there, who's an ex-tramway motorman, would know, the magnetic brakes could stop you on a sixpence if you didn't land on leaves. In autumn it could be a bit tricky stopping a tram with the magnetic brake, probably with any brake. Also, all the bogie trams have maximum traction bogies. This enabled the maximum weight to be applied to the motorised wheel in each bogie, giving added traction. This is an example of the narrow 4 foot gauge and the narrow trams. The trams are 7 feet and half an inch wide, and when they passed each other, the steps could not be put down on the offside without endangering hitting the tram coming the other way. So there were frequent replacements of steps on the trams because they often had cars on one side, or one way or another they got damaged. But you can see there that's Cuba Street, and 2 trams would routinely pass each other on Cuba Street and have a row of parked cars on each side. And motorists knew that when you parked a car alongside a tram line, you had to be a certain distance away, or you'd come back and find your car with a dented door or something like that, or a bumper, or something not quite right. So Priory Street was 1 in 12 grade, that's steeper than the Rumatucker incline. The High Tide Tram Tunnel was the last tunnel in New Zealand to be used by trams, but previously in Wellington there had been Northland, Karori and Seaturn tunnels as well. And I actually used, one of the first times I've used generative AI on the internet. I said, what city in the world had the most tram tunnels? And it came back, Wellington had 4 tram tunnels. And then I asked, what city had the second most tram tunnels? And it said, most people agree that Lisbon had the second most tram tunnels. It had 27. So I don't know what. So I'm not claiming that Wellington had the most until I make some further inquiries, but I don't think Lisbon had 27. Now, I have been to Lisbon. It is hilly, and there are streets winding up the hills, but I haven't seen any tunnels there, but I didn't see all of it. Okay, by the end of 1907, trams were operating to Island Bay, Brooklyn, Kilbirnie Post Office via the new tram-only tunnel, that's the Mount Victoria or High Tide Tram Tunnel, and to Miramar and Seaturn. By the end of 1911, trams to Karori Park, Wadestown and Lyall Bay, and plus, as I mentioned, there was a real network of lines through the city. I've really covered this, some comments I've got. There was not just one central city line via the Golden Mile, but trams also ran via Lower Cuba Street, past the front of the town hall, before the Michael Fowler Centre was built, of course, to Jervois Quay, and then via Ballard Street and into Featherston Street. They also ran later along from Courtney Place along Wakefield Street to join with Kent Terrace near the Central Fire Station. Oh, sorry, that was from the town hall area along Wakefield Street to Kent Terrace. After 1911, some more improvements were made and a new route to Northland, which involved a tunnel, which was very controversial when it was built. They really had trouble building that tunnel, and it cost a lot more than it was intended. But of course, there was also the Crawford Road route to Kilbirnie. Wallace Street used to be a dead end, but they extended it to come down to Adelaide Junction, the corner of Adelaide Road and John Street, and what else? And the other road there. And then also up Bowen Street, Tinnacorry Road, that wasn't opened until 1940. So the improvements happening all the time. That's the Fiducia type tram, that's the prototype of that one. The 29 built to that general design. But the main trams that, come on to that. I won't go into all the different trams that Wellington had. But by 1944, there were 231 trams in use. There was 30 miles of track, and there were 63 million passenger journeys on trams. That was while the system was at its peak from 1929 to 1948. But then the closures started with Wadestown being closed 1949 and Oriental Bay 1950. And they were both replaced with trolley buses. And some of you might remember the old silver trolley buses, which were the first ones. There were 10 of them, and they ran from the town hall a lot of the time, but between Oriental Bay, I think Roseneath as well, and back to the town hall, and then up to Wadestown. Here are it's a tramway map. You probably can't make out too much of the detail, but on the left is the dates when the different routes were closed. The standard Wellington tram was the double saloon, and many of you will remember hopping on and off those, or in fact running after them and hopping on, or leaping off before they stopped. They had air brakes, magnetic brakes. 4 of this type are preserved at the Wellington Tramway Museum, and one at Motat in Auckland. Men, unless accompanied by women, generally rode in the centre compartment, which was more breezy. In fact, when they were built, the centre compartment was open up to the 1930s. And then it was closed in just with the glass panels. But in each end compartment there were long bench seats and tip-over wooden seats in the centre compartment. That's a fiducia. That was for one of the Wellington festivals. Every year they had a Wellington festival in the 50s. Not every year, but many of the years. And they used to dress this tram up. It was the very last one built, number 260. Motat has 2 of those preserved, and Wellington Tramway Museum has 4, including that one, number 260. Many of you would have seen this photograph, I think. This was, it would be after 1912, but I haven't got an actual date for it. Do anyone know when that was? It was fairly early on. That's the tram terminus in the foreground.
It's probably earlier than...
Well, it would be... The tram was only converted to that configuration in 1911, so that's why I said 1912. It could be 1911, but I'd be surprised if, it wouldn't be before that from the information I've got. Anyway, it shows the first settlement there, and then that one there is 1927, and you can see the difference in the number of houses. Just going, the grassed area in the foreground is being built on by 1927, but there's looks like a circus or a fairground there with tents as well. And now this picture here, which I think I saw someone with over on the brought it tonight, did they? The framed picture of this one. Did anyone see that? Anyone lay claim to that?
Yeah, I brought it.
Did you bring it? Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Where did you have that all the time? Yeah, where did that turn up from?
That's on a postcard backing.
Oh, okay.
The board is a postcard.
It was an old postcard. Yeah.
I've never seen another copy of it or reproduced anywhere else.
No.
Until now.
No. Well, this was picked up by us from Facebook, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and that would be 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. But by chance, that is the very same tram that we recovered from a property in Paraparaumu in 1986. It's just the body. I'll show you some pictures of it later. And brought it to the museum and have now fully restored it. So you'll see some pictures of it later on.
I've spent a long time with a magnifying glass trying to see if there's anything on those uniforms that might identify the people.
Right.
Haven't yet.
No.
That's parked just at the corner of Reef Street and the Parade at the terminus.
Yeah, that's the terminus, yes. Yeah.
And the house in the background is still there in Durwood Street, but there are houses between that house and where the tram is now.
Right. That's very interesting. This is now coming up to, I was going to say the present day, to the 1960s. This is 2 trams in Rintoul Street, just at the entrance to Athletic Park. When there was a match on, the trams, it used to be special trams just going to Athletic Park, and then, of course, picking up people after the match. And they would drop people off, and then there was a crossover. And that tram on the right is just coming through the crossover, and the Island Bay bound tram, which is the fiducia one, is waiting for the line to be cleared. Island Bay Tram heading towards the terminus. The terminus just down at Reef Street, just down the end of the road there, on the parade. That was April 1963, and that was in fact I think they closed May 1963, beginning of May 1963, so it was right towards the end of the trams for Island Bay. And Island Bay was the second to last route to be closed. Newtown was the last. This one here is another Fiducia tram, and it's on its way up past Wakefield Park. And that scene hasn't changed all that much. It's still I don't know if the trees are still there actually. I haven't thought about that. But certainly on the right, there's still Wakefield Park there. Now we go to Mile Bay. Now this is when the line was first opened to Mile Bay. It's before the tram lines have been built along Mile Parade. So that was the terminus. The tram just stopped there and people were getting off to enjoy obviously a Saturday, well I would imagine it's a Saturday or a Sunday, probably a Sunday, and they're getting off there. And the line had only just recently been opened. It revolutionised the ease of access to a place like Mile Bay for Wellingtonians. And imagine when the Karori route was opened, you could go from Karori to Lyle Bay in half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and you'd think that would be amazing. Because it would have taken hours in the past. Early 1920s, Lyle Bay, and this time the line has come round the corner heading along the parade. Bit of a gathering there, some early interesting cars and motor vehicles. And then in 1960, this is an unusual photo because it shows the only Wellington tram in recent years that was not a passenger tram. That's on the left. It looks like just a box, an enclosed box. It was in fact the track grinder, which was used for removing corrugations on the surface of the tram tracks. But on this particular occasion, it was going out for a jaunt, and tram enthusiasts were interested in getting photographs of it and everything. That's Kilbirnie, that's Rongotai Road, the intersection with Bay Street. It's a bit hard, I don't know. It's really faint, it might be too much light, but the tram in the background has just turned left out of Bay Road and heading down Rongotai Road. The tram in the middle is terminated at Kilbirnie, so it's stopped, and its pole's been changed to come back, and there is a crossover just here on the tracks, and this tram, which has got a destination, C-turn, is waiting for the Fiducia to get out of the way. So there were trams a lot of trams going to Kilbirnie were going to the workshops or the depot there, but this one, it just terminated there as an ordinary service and was going back to the railway station. So that was the final 18 months when they were closed. Haitatai, 1962. Island Bay, 4th of May 1963. What were you doing that day? Were you celebrating the last tram? Anyone? There was a big crowd out there at the Island Bay terminus, and the remaining lines on the 1st and 2nd of May 1964. There was mainly Newtown to Thorndon. Closing day. That's the last tram in Thorndon Quay, taking the VIPs to the ceremony which was held down at the end of the line of Thorndon. Where Tinakori Road comes down onto Thorndon Quay, it was that's where the ceremony was held, and they sort of impromptu speeches, well, not impromptu, planned speeches, but it was an impromptu setting really. But they had the Tramway's brass silver band. Richard, what was it? It used to be the Tramway Silver Band, but by this stage it had been renamed to something else. Onsite, that's right, yeah. And that was there, and there it is, escorting the last tram back to, that's from Thornton, from the closing ceremony, walking pace or marching pace back to the railway station. And then back to Newtown, and that's the doors closing on the last tram. And all the VIPs were in there having cups of tea. The gentleman on the left, and holding up a movie camera, he was a contract employee or a contractor to WNTV1. And what happened was he somehow lost all his film just at the last minute after the tram had gone in. And so they specially brought the tram out again so he could take some more photos of it. And it went down to the bottom of the hill, the bottom of there was a climb just up to the depot building, down to the street. And then turned around, came back in, and they reenacted the closing ceremony. And there's the doors finally closing for the second time. So just a little bit about the museum. You can see that was 1964. By 1965, end of 1965, we had an opening ceremony for the museum. And looking back now, it was so sort of ad hoc, but a few little funny things about it. There was a row of 5 trams. We bought or had donated 7 trams from the Wellington City Council. We had to purchase several of them. They were £22, 10 shillings each, which is over $1,000 each now. So for a voluntary start-up organisation, finding $1,000 per tram, even more than that now, I think, with the inflation, it was not easy. But the Vintage Car Club donated 1 tram. One was destined for America, but they couldn't afford to take it to America, so we said, we'll take it off your hands. So we did, and that was another one. One was donated by Shell Oil Company, because it had Shell advertising on it, and I think we ended up paying for 2 of them. Two of the 7. There were 7 altogether. There must be 4 of them we paid for. They're not very well covered. They're open to the elements, which was not good for trams, just with canvas roofs and so on. But the opening dais there, all the important people are sitting on it. We borrowed the chairs from Paikakariki School for the day, and we covered the rough, I can't even remember what was under the tarpaulins, but those are condemned New Zealand Railway tarpaulins that the VIPs are having to sit on and look like they're important. So it was quite good fun, an amazing day. 1988 it was before we reached the beach at Whareroa Beach, it's called, at Mackay's Crossing. That's tram 239, one of the ones we've preserved. It's looking down on the terminus, and Kapiti Island in the background. It's a lovely spot, ideal for the recreation that the passengers we get now. A lot of people come to Queensland Park and picnic there and go for a tram ride, and there's a lot of there's walks as well, and a lot of other activities. Museum development, of course, has continued. This is this year, 20th of January 2025. Tram 159's 100th birthday, because it was built in 1925. Just a typical day there. That's where we start from, the station at the front. just inside Mackay's Crossing. This is Tram 17, the one you saw at Island Bay in that earlier photograph, the Island Bay terminus, with the crew standing proudly in front of it. That's essentially how we recovered it from the house in Raumati South. And we brought it down on load loader, and that was in 1986. This is in 2014. What's that? 28 years later, after we got it, and we brought it out because it was going away to have some work done on it. Now, I won't go into all of what happened. It took 10 years to restore, but here it is now. It looks totally different. Same tram, now fully restored. New mechanical and electrical equipment, because it came from Raumati with no wheels, no trucks, no bogies, and no motors, and no controllers or anything like that. But it's now complete, and it's really our pride and joy up there. It's got its operating license just issued, and it now will, or very soon, will join the trams in use up there. One difference is it doesn't have air brakes, so everyone's got to learn how to operate just on hand brakes and magnetic brakes. And we do have quite a steep hill. So make sure you've got a competent driver if you go in it. Oh, that's just advertising there, but it's what we do. And just it's the end of what I've got here. The electric tramway enabled the development of the city beyond the town belt. Prior to that, workers really had to live within the town belt to be able to get to work efficiently. It was too expensive and too slow to generally travel every day to and from work before that. It was very challenging, hills and narrow winding streets, but it was overcome, that was achieved. For 60 years they served the city of Wellington, and they're now preserved at Kapiti. So that's it. Are there any questions or comments or experiences that you would like to relate?
Just to make a bit of a link with an earlier talk we had here.
Oh, okay. Just to make a link between the trams, your talk, and the talk we had here earlier in the year regarding Alfred Hill, the well-known composer. He was doing very well at the beginning of the century, and along came Trams. He was doing so well with his operas and things like that he was going to head off to return back to Europe where he'd studied. He was going to go to England and become the next, Gilbert and Sullivan sort of thing. Unfortunately, he was travelling home on the top of a tram in rather bad weather, and he got very ill, and that got cancelled.
Oh, is that right?
So there's pluses and minuses.
Yeah. Well, on the top of a tram was probably one of those double deckers, either the early sort or there was another sort, much bigger one, which reputedly could carry over 100 passengers, and it was open on the top. There were 6 of them, and their latest. Do you remember any of those in service at all? It was up to 1954. Sorry, I can't remember your name again.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gregory.
They were in use until 1954. They didn't have air brakes, and one of their last runs was from Island Bay to the railway station, regular runs, and it carried the Wellington Girls' College and Queen Margaret's and St Mary's girls to school every weekday morning, and they had them again in the afternoon, and they could carry over 100 people, but I don't know what happened on the weekdays. I've never seen any reference to it, whether the girls all got completely and utterly drenched or whether they all squeezed in downstairs, but there's a number of photographs around of the tram arriving at the railway station, loaded with all these college girls ready to go off up Murphy Street or whatever street they had to go, Molesworth Street, to get to their school. And there was a motorman who he died a few years ago, but you know, tram motormen, they didn't have tram drivers, they were motormen. He told us that that was one of his scariest experiences on the trams, was driving one of those things, coming down Rintoul Street in autumn, in the rain, with leaves on the tracks, so that the magnetic track brakes would just slide on the leaves and not grip the rails. The power meant to be a magnetic force, but the leaves would prevent that, and trying to stop the tram. And you had the handbrake as well, which wound brakes onto the wheels, but you go into a slide. And of course, the tram stopped halfway down Rintoul Street. He said you had to go very cautiously to be able to stop at it. There were ways of doing it. You can put the tram into reverse, and that sort of would stop you eventually. And another thing called third emergency, where you got the two motors in to contradict each other, one turning one way and one turning the other way, and that would stop the tram, but with a big jerk. And but you know, you had to know what you were doing, and I suppose that's why they were called motormen, because they had to know how the motors worked and how the you know, in the early days, the controller and the motor and everything, they had to know a bit about it. But he said that was one of the worst things, and but those trams could really carry a lot of people. There's good photographs of them around too. Yeah. Yes.
If they could carry a lot of people, why were they taken out of service?
Well, it's a good question. Not everyone agreed with them being taken out of service, but it was, first of all, it was the trend in English-speaking countries that trams were old-fashioned and had to be got rid of. But I think it was also a function of the Second World War, that there was no maintenance done in Britain or in Australia, New Zealand in particular, that I can think of. And it ended the war with run-down tracks, run-down trams. Nobody liked them because they were dirty and drab. And they always, another telling point of course was they had to have a crew of two, a conductor and a motorman. And it just seemed that the trend was to get, well, trolley buses became popular, and then diesel buses really improved, and of course battery electric now. But it was really the saving and not having to rebuild all the tracks and relay tracks, so that maintenance, and also the double crewing compared with the bus, as much as anything. But if you look at Australia, Brisbane was keeping its trams, but then they had a massive fire and it destroyed half their trams, over half their trams, and they decided, well, you know, it'd be so expensive to build new trams that they would rather just buy some buses. They borrowed buses from Sydney and all over the place to keep the service going, and I think that convinced them that they could do that with buses. Sydney decided that trams had had it, and the buses were more modern. But Melbourne had a big wide street. Trams were very efficient there, and a very strong, powerful chief executive of the tramway who convinced his council that they would keep the trams. And aren't they lucky, because they've now got rapid transit all over. They've still got street trams in some areas, just like they always were, but where they built new lines, they just go out into the countryside and it's rapid transit, and it goes right into the city, through the city.
They built extended Adelaide, they extended tram line there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Adelaide got rid of most of those trams, but it kept them to Glenelg, and I think you're right, it's extending them Yeah. Oh yes, they've got new ones, haven't they?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, right through the centre of the city. Yeah. And so has Newcastle's got one. The Gold Coast, yeah, Gold Coast.
Yes, they're building trams along.
Yeah, light rail. And Canberra's getting light rail. Yeah.
One of the most dangerous things I remember about trams was after a rugby match at Athletic Park, which is where the village and the park is now, and there was no safety at all. Let so many people on and then they take off. So people used to stand on the steps and hang on.
That's right.
People
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people today, it's unbelievable.
But did you ever hear of an accident?
No.
No accident. Perfectly safe. But there's a photograph of a tram coming around the Basin Reserve like that. People hanging off every possible conceivable angle. And the tram is lower on the weight of it on the body must have lowered it onto its bogies. I don't know how it actually ran, but it's much lower to the ground than they normally were.
The other thing is I grew up in Karori in the 1940s. Wellington College was the place where we went to, and they had a special tram for the boys. And I remember getting on at Churchill, the top of when you by St Mary's School, and there would be a prefect there who made sure we all behaved. And of course, in those days, if you didn't have your cap on, you were expelled.
Yeah. Well, there used to also be school trams from the front of the railway station to Wellington College. And I don't know if they, Wellington High School as well, or what's now Wellington Tech, I think it was. And they, even in the early 60s, they were still going. And it was quite common for the pole to be pulled off the wire and things like that by the kids who obviously knew nothing about it when the tram stopped and wanted, they were all innocent, but they did that. And one story I heard was a Wellington College tram ended up going up Cuba Street because the driver didn't know where Wellington College was, and the boys told him that's the way to go. They ended up at the zoo. Had to be brought back.
Keith, I want to thank you for a very splendid presentation. It's quite fascinating, and it makes me, anyway, and I think everybody, think about all sorts of things. Something I've been trying to get to the bottom of is why no one, I actually wrote an article about this, why no one protested when the overhead wires were finally removed. They were a major part of our cityscape for a century, and nobody cared. They just went. Nobody liked them, nobody noticed, they just disappeared. And that was the end of one of the links to the trams. I can tell you one story to add to your collection. My father, when I knew him, was a very proper sort of person. But before he died, he recorded a lot of tapes about his life. When he was a child living in Konini Street in Hataitai, just above where the tram tunnel comes out, at one stage a tram came through there and went over on its side. Now, a huge crowd gathered round to look at the tram on its side, and my father and his friend went to my grandfather's cupboard, got out his thickest, he was a tailor, got out his thickest tailoring thread, and then weaved their way through the crowd, pulling the thread around, causing complete chaos. And I've looked and looked for a picture of that tram, but I haven't found one yet. And apparently that's what he did.
Yeah, where was it again, sorry?
That would have been in about 1929 or 30, something like that.
Do you know that one, Richard?
But that is what he claimed. And I think it's fantastic that you've identified that you've been able to identify that picture.
Yeah, I think you might have found it, did you, Richard? Or was that the Tram 17 one?
Well, Chris got it. Chris got it from the Postcard Society.
Oh, I thought it was on Facebook.
Well, it was on Facebook originally.
Yeah.
Chris you, Chris? Yeah, Chris located it. Yeah,
Oh.
I found it originally on Facebook,
Yeah.
and then it wasn't a very good. It was a very small pixels and so on.
Yeah.
So I asked Chris.
Yeah, enhanced it, yeah.
Get one from his friends, and that's where it came from.
Well, it's quite amazing. It was the same tram that we were preserving at Queen Elizabeth Park. Yeah.
So thank you again, and congratulations on what you've done as a voluntary organisation. I mean, it is just fantastic, going over decades and decades, and every decade, and improve. You know, it's improved, it's better, and it provides a real link for the past. I love the story that you told about people whose previous experience of trams was going to visit you.
Yeah, right.
Now they're bringing
It's embarrassing.
their children and grandchildren. I think that's
amazing how time, just one little anecdote. When we first ran the trams up there, and I'd be in my 20s, young 20s, I remember talking to a really old person, probably about my age now, and he said, I really like the horse trams. The horse trams were really good. And he could remember the horse trams. And I thought, you must be so old. Now the years go by and you realise how the generations change. Because when we first started, people could remember the horse trams.
Oh, that's, yes, that getting old experience is something some of us here have experienced. The school has its 125th coming up on the weekend, and the principal was talking to me, and she said, you should come along and talk to some of these really old people. I said, well, how old are they? They were about 5 or 6 years older than me. So it comes to us all. So thank you again, and I hope you're able to stay and be pressed with some more questions.
Well, certainly. We've got Richard Gray, I've sort of introduced as a member of the Tramway Museum here with me, and we've got a few publications and things, so if you've got time to have a look at, you're welcome to, or just spread them out.
I'll put out that you can have a look at.
We brought some others there.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Let's not muddle them up.
No, we won't muddle them up.
So thank you so much.